Hi, I'm Malika Bilal.
I'm Ahmed Shahabuddin, and you're in the stream.
Today, the United Nations in the age of digital diplomacy.
Can young people give the aging world body a new lease on life?
The big question we asked our community ahead of this show was, is it possible for youth to influence an international body like the UN? And if so, how? Well, our community, like much of the world, is divided. Ahmed Shahabuddin, you know that best.
I do know that best. It's quite a polarized community here, but Christine's saying she thinks it is possible for youth to influence an international body by listening to what we think is good for us. We just need a listening ear. But Maria responded quickly, saying not just the listening ear, our views as young people matter a lot as well. So getting us involved at all levels is very important.
People want action.
People want action. But don't worry, you have our ear, so you can follow this conversation, share your thoughts with us using the hashtag AJStream.
I'm Aaron Burgess, Master of Public Policy, and I'm in the stream.
The United Nations is 70 years old, and all of its 8 Secretary Generals have been older men. Well, as it prepares to select a new leader, young people say they have a few ideas to improve the system.
For starters, they want more of a voice in UN policy and practice. With social media and a drive to save the world, they're starting to be heard.
This week, at the first ever televised Secretary General debate, one Brazilian student was able to pose a question to the candidates vying for the UN's top job.
And here's the original question he submitted that got him inside the hall.
Meu nome é Leonardo Buzzi, eu tenho 13 anos, eu estudo no Colégio Dom Bosco e moro em Rio do Sul, Santa Catarina, Brasil. Levando em conta a desigualdade mundial, com pessoas em situação de extrema pobreza e 1% da população mais rica possuindo 40% dos recursos mundiais, como vocês fariam para balancear esses ganhos, sabendo que 3 dos 5 membros permanentes da ONU são as maiores economias mundiais?
So, what role can youthful idealism play in reforming the UN? Joining us to discuss this in Johannesburg, South Africa, Vivian Onano is a youth advisor for UN Women. In Boulder, Colorado, Shu Tezcut Martinez is an indigenous climate activist and youth director of Earth Guardians. In New York, home of the United Nations, Susan Alsner is head of the UN Non-Governmental Liaison Service. And Claudia Rosette is a foreign policy fellow at the Independent Women's Forum and a columnist for Forbes.com. Thanks for joining us, everyone. So much to discuss, so many people talking to us about what they want, what they think people should do. I want to start, Vivian, by asking you something off the back of this tweet we got from Raphael. He said, not a single question asked on youth at the debate yesterday, the most critical constituency and issue in the 21st century. Vivian, I know you stayed up all night to watch the entire debate. What did you think of it?
Thank you so much for having me on the show. I really love the debate. I love how it was organized. I love the transparency. And I also just loved how candidates took their time to honestly answer the questions. During the session, some of the key values that came out, or the key qualities that came out in the discussion about the next Secretary General, they were talking about courage, humility, visionary, strong conviction, persuasive, collaborative. And these are all things that we young people today demonstrate in the work that we do. And that's why, just going back to your question, young people play a vital role in the UN system. And now with the recently adopted Sustainable Development Goals, these are our goals as young people. We are going to live these goals for the next 15 years. And we cannot continue being sidelined in the implementation process, in the decision-making process. We need a strong seat at the table. Our voices have to be heard, and our ideas have to be put into action. So yesterday...
Go ahead, Vivian. Go ahead, Vivian.
Yeah, so yesterday, I know a lot was discussed around peace and security, gender equality, but yes, we didn't hear more about youth. Yet the world today, we have 1.8 billion young people globally. The world is more youthful than it has ever been in the history of civilization.
Oh,
so
wow. That's a big claim there. I like that. I like your passion. I love that you stayed up late to watch Vivian. Shu Tezcut, you hear Vivian's passion there. I know that you have spoken before the United Nations several times on a few occasions. You've even been on this show previously to talk about one of those occasions. How much does having a new Secretary General, and depending on who that is, what does that matter to you as a youth activist?
I think it's gonna really impact a lot, because what I've seen with my participation in the United Nations process is that more and more we are seeing open doors for young people and for civil society to become a part of having our voices heard and actually have action be made on our behalf, action taken on our behalf from our world leaders. It's an incredibly important voice that needs to be heard, the voice of young people. And it's incredibly exciting to see that as we have a new Secretary General, we have very high hopes that there will actually be further conversation, further dialogue, and further action to really begin to collaboratively work together with the United Nations as a vessel that can really bring forth change in this world, not only from the perspective of the leaders of the world, but from the people that are directly being impacted by the problems that they're talking about, and by the people that will directly inherit the solutions that they create.
So you've got high hopes, Susan. You're nodding.
Yeah, I mean, I think referring back to the question from social media, he's asking about not a question about youth, but there was a question from youth. And what's really interesting to see is that a 13-year-old boy from Brazil comes and challenges the Security Council approach about
That was my
balance
favorite
of
part.
power.
I loved that. That was my favorite part of the debate.
So he's asking what measures will be undertaken for the Security Council to become more just and egalitarian in the world body. And this is, you know, for the membership to understand that 13-year-olds care about this and can come with such a force of voice and expression. It does a lot for helping to, as I would say, not just look at model UN, but how about remodel UN? And this is what the youth will bring, and we need to keep them coming in.
And, you know, in that vein, I mean, a lot of people online talking about that, you know, very same thing. Bashir saying reform the Security Council by expanding the membership, give voice to Africa, South America, Arab, India, singling India there out, even though many regions, youth and women. So I don't know, what do you think of that, Claudia? I mean, obviously everyone has these aspirations. They want youth to be more involved, but is it realistic?
No. Look, I think it's
the voice of reason there. This is the rational voice. Go ahead, explain why, Claudia.
I don't think that young people are fools, and I do think that they're going to have to live with what comes out of this. And the utopian buzzwords that have been spilling out of this debate are not going to actually provide what they want. They're greatly misleading. I think that somebody might have answered and didn't to the young Brazilian boy's question. Well, yeah, but if you give 10% of the world's resources to North Korea or to the Iranians, you're not going to make anyone better off. They're going to destroy that. And the issue that really isn't coming up, and I think is terribly important, isn't how you redistribute things through the UN, where you end up with an elite in New York, and it is an elite. It is a very corrupt organization run by powerful people in the end who will not do the things that you hope. If you look through the actual history, you will see they don't. What I think I would love to hear young people talking about, and the people at the UN, is the issue of how do you actually promote liberty, individual choice, genuine freedom, because that's what the UN does not, as a rule, promote, and that's what actually has made for a better world.
Well, I think that what we've seen historically is that leaders don't often do a good job at representing the voices of young people, and therefore a lot of young people globally lose faith in our leaders to make decisions on our behalf. And regardless of whether it's the distribution of power or climate change or poverty, these are different kinds of things that are going to directly impact our future. Obviously, young people aren't qualified to make decisions on behalf of the United Nations, but I think greater dialogue needs to be had and greater action and collaboration needs to be had, because our generation is going to be most impacted by every problem we see in the world today. That is a fact.
If I may,
because
I know this is a roundtable, but if I may, could I just answer that? There are questions that you need to be asking of the United Nations, because it's not all a love fest. It won't work out that way. Look at history. Human nature is messy.
I agree with that. It's never been about that. It's never been about that. And having young people involved isn't making it, oh, okay, we're going to have all the kids involved. It's going to be, you know, airy-fairy, lovey-dovey. Like, it's about concrete action. My generation, more than anyone, understands that, because we are more connected than any generation ever has been. We have infinite information at the tip of our fingers. So we understand the dire situation of the planet. We understand how complicated these issues are. It's not a laughing matter.
I'm going to tell you with great respect, no, you don't, because there's a difference between information and You don't.
Well-
I'm sorry. I can speak the truth to him. I think he would be. I think.
Yeah,
he's willing
yeah,
to
no, I
listen.
want to jump in here
And-
because
but-
I think
but-
I'd like to
let's just let her explain why, and then we'll come back to you. Claudia, go ahead.
I'm curious what you have to say.
Information does not necessarily add up to understanding what it means. The big question is, what does it mean? And the questions that your generation needs to be asking of the UN isn't only, do you want peace? Of course they'll say they want peace. Or
It's not about just
how
asking that question.
How
I
do you
understand
want
that.
this to get done? And you
Okay,
actually need
but-
people who look at how do they spend, not only how do they raise the money, how do they spend it, the actual boring nitty-gritty details. And I'll back out to listen to the rest of you, but you need to truly hold them to account, not just on they want peace. We all say we want peace. The question is,
Okay, well, that's
how do you
not
get
even
there?
what I brought up.
Yeah.
But-
Well, Susan,
No, I
Susan
understand
wanted
that
to
there's
jump
a
in
lot
there.
of
Shoot,
steps.
Scott. Let's just hear
Yeah, go
from
ahead.
Susan there because
Go ahead, Susan.
she looked like she was dying to say something. Go ahead, Susan.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I mean, I guess I just want to model a better approach, even in this discussion, about respect for voice. And I think that Scott is a great example, and there are others like him who, when they come to the UN, they really have challenged the power structures here in a very profound way. I don't know if anybody's seen the speech that he gave here in June of last year, but it's been so successful on YouTube, even speaking to the General Assembly context, which is very formal. He's gotten more than almost 1 million views of this video because people resonated with the message that he brought, and it was very challenging. And I guess what I'd like to see is an approach where people come to the UN, even in the discussions, all of us with some humility and some mutual respect, that we can model a way forward to the dynamics that we want to see. And why I reacted in that moment is because I don't feel comfortable, and I feel a need to speak out when I hear someone saying, no, you don't know, or it's, you need to do this. I want a different conversation. I want to hear Scott authentically and with respect for what he may be bringing that we haven't
I
heard.
hear you there, and one of the things I think is interesting, especially about this conversation, is that our two youth voices here have done just that, made their voices heard, and have had them amplified at the UN. So I actually want to play a clip of Vivian doing just that. Now, this is from 2015. This is Vivian in action. You can see her passion there. Have a look at what she had to say.
Governments have to realize that young people have the potential to be powerful engines for development. But this is not possible if they feel neglected and their issues to be ignored. I would like to request the member states to unanimously pass a resolution that as from this year henceforth, it is mandatory for governments to have a youth delegate among them when they attend the General Assembly in September.
So you were demanding a youth delegate. This is at the UN General Assembly in 2015 at the Youth Now event. Have you seen any progress, and what caused that demand?
So actually I've seen progress because last year during the UN General Assembly, through the Office of the UN Secretary General's Envoy on Youth, Mr. Ahindawi managed to get 194 young people to come to the United Nations General Assembly during the adoption of the Sustainable Development Goals. And I think that was a step forward for young people to be part of the discussion and part of the conversation that was happening at that time. And just back to Claudia, when she was talking about young people, I think that is something that we young people continue to face, being taken seriously and also being taken seriously and our voices being respected. As young people, most of the time will be ignored, that we don't have the experience, we don't have the exposure, but we are the people on the ground tackling these issues. We are the people on the ground struggling and grappling with our government to make transformation. If you look at the Syrian refugees, it's the faces of young people, it's the faces of young girls. If you look at Central African Republic, it's the faces of young girls, young people who are on the ground who are grappling with these issues. And that's why I don't think we can say just because we're young people, we really don't know what we are talking about, or just because we are young people, we cannot demand a seat at the table at the UN, at the United Nations.
May I clarify what I was saying? Because I certainly think it's worth absolutely listening to young people. And as I said, you more than the older people will be living with the results of what you do. What I was saying is, please don't mistake the enormous flow of information in the world today, of data, for wisdom. There's a difference between having immense amounts of data and actually understanding what to do with it. And again, the distinction is important between, do resources belong, for instance, to a free and democratic nation where people decide what they will do, or do they belong to a dictatorship where the dictator decides what they will do, where North Korea, a totalitarian system, will use them to help out the dictator while the people are starved, abused, repressed, cut off from the world. Horrific things go on there. That's one case. I could name more. And what I'm just saying is, in trying to reform the UN, you're going to find you're up against not just broad concepts. And I think you understand much of this, but you also are up against Vladimir Putin, who runs Russia. He was trained by the KGB. He's a canny guy. He's got nuclear weapons. He's thinking about what he can do and how he's invaded a neighboring state. He took a part of it, 2 years ago? You're up against Iran, which is on the executive board of UN Women and is known as abusing terribly its own women, in fact, which leads the world in juvenile executions. And these are questions that are boring in a way to get into, but they're questions you need to be asking about. I would love to see young people asking, how does it really work?
I'm not so sure that...
Can I offer something?
Go ahead.
If I'd just like to jump in and say, for example, different ways of working are important, and modeling different kinds of governance. You just highlighted some governments that you have issues with the way that they work. Our office at the UN is just a few... Yeah, of course I do. But I just want to say, in terms of trying to model a better way that can work, even with countries like Russia and the others that you named, the way that we have had to develop methods at the UN to enable civil society participation when challenges are presented by governments to the space for civil society, we've had to develop new methods. And actually the methods that we're using, we learned them from youth. We learned them from young people. Our office worked with youth organizers coming to the UN system to figure out how to work more efficiently, more effectively, with better tools, with better democratic practice. We learned it from people under the age of 30, all of it. And we're implementing practices like Google Docs and use of social media and other online collaborative tools, even how you work within those spaces, from much younger people than maybe have high posts at the UN, but they've had huge impact on the way in which, say, for example, speakers are determined in the UN. Now it's open and transparent and a participatory process that enables civil society to say who they want to get these high-level speaking roles. For example, Scott, he wasn't picked by some UN bureaucrat who sat in a back room and decided this guy was cool because he had awesome videos. He was picked by a committee of 25 people who included youth, women, indigenous peoples, trade unions, farmers from all over the world, regionally balanced, gender
he's
balanced.
snapping to that.
Committee, yeah, right. That committee is who picked Scott, is who picked Hindu at the Paris Agreement signing, is who picked those kids. The kid yesterday you saw at the Security Council, Christian, Kathy from the Marshall Islands, who addressed the climate summit. These are collective actions on who should come and speak at the UN using tools taught by youth.
Fair enough. And I think go ahead.
No, I was going to say that as well as, obviously young people don't have the knowledge that older people have. At the same time, a lot of old people are stuck in their ways and are stubborn and don't want to change the way that things have been happening in the world for a really long time, which makes roadblocks for change and roadblocks for action. So although, there's a lot that needs to be done with collaboration, with the wisdom of elders, and with the fresh, new, young perspective that young people have to bring to the table. And exactly as, Susan was saying, it's about bringing these conversations together and having the voices heard in a way that our generation has never been heard before. It's unheard of to have young people and civil society be represented at the United Nations until Susan started actually really taking steps forward.
I agree with you there, and I think you're right. It is unheard of, and I think Claudia would also agree with you, but I think she's also bringing up the question of what does it actually mean to have youth involved. And, echoing that, we have Rosebell Kagumir on Facebook Live commenting, asking us, but young people from where? The inequality in the UN on who does what and who has power must be addressed. Otherwise, youth, just like the countries in the UN, aren't homogenous. Power imbalance must be tackled. And I just wonder, what you make of that, specifically, Vivian. It's this question of Sure, youth can be involved, but youth from where, and what are they going to do, and will that change the challenges that already face the UN?
I think I had this conversation again earlier today, and I was talking about youth engagement and meaningful youth engagement. And as young people, we have to arm ourselves with the right information, right expertise, and right skills. And that involves working on the ground and actually addressing the issues. Right now, we have the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. I continue to advise young people, pick one goal that resonates with you, that you're passionate about, start working on it on the ground, and mobilize other young people on the ground, mobilize resources on the ground, and tap into the national framework that's working on the Sustainable Development Goals before we can get to the UN. So then, through those channels, you get to be mentored, you get to have those intergenerational dialogues, and also you inform yourself on the real issues on the ground, so that when we come at the UN level, where we don't actually have a permanent seat, we are trying to claim a permanent seat, then we can be taken seriously. So we as young people, we still also have a way to go to be taken seriously, but also to claim a permanent seat at the decision-making table.
You know, I want to play you all just a little clip from the debate that we saw earlier this week. This is a clip from Irina Bokova of Bulgaria. She's the Director General of UNESCO. And this is what she had to say about those sustainable development goals that you mentioned, Vivian. I want you all to have a look at this.
If we have to have a face of this agenda of sustainable development, maybe we should take a photo of a girl that is 12 years, 10, 12 years, that is continuing to go to school, to a safe school, that is not married off, that is supported by her family and her community, and then she is empowered to continue with her life.
Claudia, what do you make of her comments?
Completely hypocritical. UNESCO sounds wonderful, and they live a very nice life with their Paris headquarters and their tax-free salaries, which, as you get older, you'll discover people do like to hang on to and will sacrifice their principles for. That's how the world tends to work. And Irina Bokova has gone around the world praising dictators who run countries in which there is no real opportunity for anyone, not girls, not anybody. And the thing I would like to actually suggest to young people right now, the people we're talking with, the people who found a platform at the UN, is by all means urge transparency at the UN, urge debate. But you might also want to consider the UN is an aging institution. It was set up in a different time. It has failed repeatedly. It has failed to prevent wars. It can't even stop peacekeeper rape. They've been promising for 10 years that their peacekeepers will stop raping children in Africa. They still aren't there. It continues. They've been promising for decades that they'll stop stealing money from the taxpayers that's supposed to go to feed hungry children and help refugees. It's still not fixed.
Claudia,
and I'm just saying, consider other routes for your...
I appreciate you bringing all those points up. I really do. And, you know, there's glass half full, glass half empty. But I do want to bring up one last question that came from a young Jordan Street in New York City, where, of course, the debate was happening. Let's take a look at this video.
My name is Jordan Street from Wafuna. My comment about the UN engaging youth is about Security Council Resolution 2250, adopted in December 2015. This resolution, for the first time in Security Council history, acknowledges that youth should be actively engaged in shaping lasting peace. It encourages member states to promote youth participation and gives youth a hook to enter the conversation. But obviously we know that a resolution does not simply solve problems. The UN needs to further allow youth to engage in all conversation and needs to fund more youth-driven organizations.
Vivian, your thoughts?
Okay, first of all, I think I've been having this at the back of my head. I think with the incoming UN Secretary General, and I thought this was going to be raised up today, we don't have a UN agency that's just focused on youth issues and addressing youth issues at the UN. So I hope that with the incoming UN Secretary General, that's going to be a priority, so that we can have a central place or a central agency that we can tap into for resources, we can tap into for information and knowledge, and we can tap into for expertise moving forward. Then that way, we can have consolidated
Vivian's
youth
prescription for the future. That's all the time we have. But you heard it here first from Vivian Onano. You heard from Shutez Martinez, Susan Alsner, and Claudia Rosette. We'll see you online.